Once upon a time, in a peaceful kingdom surrounded by shimmering lakes and green forests, there lived a young princess who loved beautiful things. She lived in a grand palace filled with laughter, music, and sunshine. The princess had everything she could ever wish for: silk dresses, golden toys, and sparkling jewels. But her favorite treasure of all was a small golden ball. Every day, when the sun was bright and warm, the princess would wander into the royal gardens to play. The garden was full of color and life. Roses danced in the breeze, butterflies fluttered between blossoms, and birds sang soft melodies. At the very end of the garden stood an ancient fountain made of white stone. Its water was so clear that it looked like liquid glass, and it sparkled with every drop of sunlight. The princess loved to sit beside the fountain, tossing her golden ball into the air and catching it again and again. The ball shone like a tiny sun, and she smiled whenever it glittered in her hands. But one afternoon, as she tossed it higher than usual, it slipped from her fingers and fell with a splash into the fountain. The ball sank deep into the dark water, disappearing from sight. The princess gasped. She leaned over the edge, trying to see it, but the fountain was too deep and too shadowy. Her heart felt heavy with sadness. The golden ball was her most precious toy, and now it was gone forever. Just then, she noticed a small ripple in the water. From beneath the surface, a little frog rose up, green and shining in the sunlight. His round eyes blinked, and his voice sounded calm and curious. Though the princess could not understand his croaks, it seemed as if the frog was offering help. The princess watched as the frog dived back into the water. Bubbles rose to the surface. After a few moments, he reappeared, and in his mouth was the golden ball. The sunlight glimmered on the wet gold as he pushed it toward her. The princess reached out, took the ball carefully, and smiled with relief. She clutched her ball tightly and ran back toward the palace, her heart light again. Behind her, the little frog looked up at her retreating figure. He gave a quiet, lonely croak, then disappeared back into the cool water. That evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky with pink and orange light, the princess sat in the grand dining hall with her family. Candles flickered, silver dishes gleamed, and gentle music floated through the room. But just as dinner began, there came a small, wet sound at the door. A soft knock followed by a croak. The princess froze. She remembered the frog from the fountain. The sound came again, a little louder this time. The king, noticing his daughter's worried face, asked what was wrong. The princess told him everything, how her golden ball had fallen into the fountain, and how a frog had brought it back to her. The king listened carefully and said that promises, once made, must always be kept. He told his daughter that the frog had shown kindness and deserved her respect. Though she didn't quite understand, the princess nodded quietly. Soon, the frog was brought into the hall. His small green body looked quite strange among the glittering dishes and golden candles. He sat beside the princess's plate, blinking his wide eyes. Though she felt uncomfortable, she remembered her father's words. She carefully placed a few crumbs of bread and tiny drops of milk before him. The frog ate happily, and when dinner was done, he gave a small croak of contentment. As the night grew darker, the princess rose to go to her room, but the frog followed her. She turned, unsure what to do. Again, her father gently reminded her that kindness should always be returned. So the princess lifted the frog and carried him upstairs. His skin was cool and smooth, and though she tried to be gentle, she wished he would stay behind. In her golden bedroom, the moonlight shimmered through soft curtains. She placed the frog on a small silk pillow beside her bed. That night, the princess couldn't sleep. She listened to the quiet chirping of crickets and the soft breathing of the frog beside her. The world outside was peaceful. Slowly, her heart softened. She realized the little creature had done her no harm. He had helped her, and all he wanted was friendship. When morning came, the princess awoke to the first rays of sunlight touching her face. She turned to look at the frog, but he was gone. In his place stood a handsome young prince with kind eyes and a gentle smile. The princess gasped softly, her heart full of wonder. The prince told his story, that he had once been a human, cursed by an enchantress to live as a frog until someone showed him true kindness. The princess's gentle heart had broken the spell. Though the story was beyond her dreams, she felt joy and warmth spread through her. That very day, the prince asked the king for permission to take the princess to his kingdom, where he ruled beside a sparkling lake, the same one from which he had once emerged as a frog. The king smiled and agreed, for he saw that his daughter had grown wiser and kinder. Soon, the palace was filled with celebration. Bells rang, flowers bloomed, and laughter filled the halls. The princess and the prince rode together in a golden carriage drawn by white horses. Birds flew above them, singing happy songs. When they arrived at the prince's kingdom, they found it bright and peaceful. The people welcomed them with joy, and the lake shimmered under the afternoon sun. From that day forward, the princess and the prince lived together in harmony and love. They often walked by the water's edge, remembering how kindness and courage had brought them together. The princess never forgot the lesson she had learned, that true beauty lives not in golden toys or sparkling jewels, but in the goodness of the heart. And so, their days passed gently. Seasons came and went. Spring blossoms, summer rains, autumn leaves, and winter snow. The palace stood strong beside the lake, surrounded by laughter and love. Sometimes, on quiet evenings, when the moonlight touched the water, the princess would hear the soft croak of a frog far away. It reminded her of the day her golden ball fell into the fountain, the day her life changed forever. And with a tender smile, she would whisper a silent thank you to the friend who had taught her the true magic of kindness. And they lived happily ever after. In a quiet valley where the days drifted like clouds and the nights hummed softly with crickets, there lay a small village wrapped in the arms of green hills. From above, the village looked like a handful of tiny stars scattered across the earth. Cottages with warm windows, gardens brushed with color, and narrow paths that curled between them like silver threads. Beyond the last house, where the cobbled road melted into grass, stood the edge of an ancient forest. The villagers called it the Whispering Wood, because when the wind passed through its leaves, it sounded like voices telling old stories. At the border of this forest lived a young girl named Elara and her mother. Their cottage was small but full of gentle things: the scent of drying herbs, the creak of wicker baskets, and sunlight that fell through the window like honey. Elara's mother spun wool for a living. Her hands were quick and steady, and her laughter filled the house like music. Though their life was simple, Elara felt it was rich in ways that could not be counted. In the warmth of firelight, the smell of bread cooling on the sill, and the comfort of knowing the forest was near. Each morning, as the mist lifted from the meadows, Elara carried a wooden bucket down to the stream that ran through the trees. She liked to watch the water twist and sparkle, carrying tiny petals downstream like drifting wishes. Sometimes she would pause, close her eyes, and listen to the heartbeat of the forest. The rustle of ferns, the low hum of bees, the distant call of a dove. She loved the forest as if it were alive, and in its own quiet way, it loved her back. The trees seemed to lean closer when she walked beneath them. The streams ran clearer where her feet had passed. Even the smallest creatures, rabbits, birds, and foxes, watched her without fear. Ilara never noticed how special this was. To her, kindness was as natural as breathing. She shared what she had, smiled easily, and found joy in helping, gathering herbs for the sick, mending the wings of a broken bird, or simply sitting beside her mother as she worked, humming softly to the rhythm of the spinning wheel. Seasons passed gently, spring with its soft rains, summer with its golden light, autumn with its falling leaves, and winter with its quiet frost. Ilara grew from a small child into a graceful girl, and though her hands were often calloused from work, her heart remained as pure as sunlight through glass. One morning, after a night of heavy rain, Ilara walked farther into the forest than usual. The air smelled fresh and green, as if the earth had just been washed clean. The ground glistened with dew, and the light fell through the trees in soft beams that looked almost solid, like paths of gold leading deeper into the woods. She followed one such path until she came to a place she had never seen before, a hidden glade where wildflowers bloomed in every color. At the center of it lay a pool so clear it mirrored the sky. Ripples moved slowly across the surface, though no wind stirred the leaves. Ilara knelt to drink, and as she did, she noticed something strange. A faint shimmer deep within the water, like moonlight caught beneath the surface. It flickered once, then again, until the whole pool seemed to glow with a pale, trembling light. She leaned closer. The water parted, and from its depths rose a tiny, glowing figure. It was no larger than a bird, but its light was soft and beautiful, as if made of all the colors of dawn. It hovered above the pool, wings trembling like the petals of a flower. Around it, droplets of water hung in the air, sparkling like crystals. Ilara could feel a warmth spreading through her chest, not from the sun, but from something gentle and alive. The quiet wonder of the forest itself. The little being, a fairy, tried to rise higher, but her wings faltered. She drifted downward and landed on a rock beside the pool, her glow dimming. Ilara saw that one of the fairy's wings was torn. Without a thought, the girl reached into her basket and pulled out a strip of soft cloth. She dipped it into the water and carefully cleaned the fairy's fragile form. Then she placed the fairy in the curve of a leaf and covered her with the edge of her shawl, keeping her warm. For a long while, nothing moved. The air grew still, the trees silent. Then, slowly, the fairy stirred. Her light brightened, first faintly, then stronger, until it filled the glade with soft gold. Tiny sparkles lifted from her wings and floated upward like fireflies. She rose from the leaf and hovered before Ilara's face. Though no words were spoken, Ilara felt something in her heart. A soundless voice that seemed to say, "Thank you," not with words, but with warmth. The fairy lifted one small hand and touched the air above Ilara's head. A ring of light appeared, then melted into a soft breeze that smelled of wildflowers. And then, as quietly as she had come, the fairy vanished, leaving only the faint glow of her magic in the air. Ilara returned home, thinking it had all been a dream. But the next morning, something unusual happened. The withered herbs in her garden had grown tall overnight. The thyme and chamomile had bloomed, their colors richer than ever. When she carried bread to an old woman in the village, the woman's aching hands seemed to ease at her touch. And everywhere Elara went, small wonders followed. A wilting rose lifted its head again after she passed. A wounded sparrow took flight the next day. The air around her always smelled faintly of lavender and rain. The villagers began to notice. They whispered about the girl, who seemed to bring life wherever she went. Some called her blessed. Others said she carried luck in her smile. But Elara never thought much of it. She continued to help, to give, to care, because that was simply who she was. One summer, the rains did not come. The river shrank into a narrow stream. The fields turned dry and pale, and the wells began to empty. The villagers grew anxious. Without water, the crops would fail, and hunger would follow. Elara's mother fell ill that same month, her strength fading with the heat. Elara cared for her day and night, fetching the last drops of water she could find, fanning her with leaves, whispering soft songs to help her sleep. One evening, when the sun had burned low and red behind the hills, Elara stood at the doorway of her cottage and looked toward the forest. The trees shimmered in the distance, their tops glowing faintly in the fading light. Something deep within her stirred, a memory of golden wings and silver light. Without hesitation, she took her pail and walked toward the woods. The path was dry and cracked beneath her feet, and the air smelled of dust. But when she reached the glade, the pool was still there, shining faintly under the first stars. The surface was calm, but deep inside, a faint glow trembled, like the heartbeat of the forest. Elara knelt beside the pool. She thought of her mother, of the thirsty fields, of the children whose laughter had grown quiet. Her heart ached with love and worry. Slowly, she dipped her pail into the water. When she lifted it, the liquid shimmered, pale silver, cool as moonlight. She carried it carefully back through the forest, her steps guided by the faint glow from the pail. At home, she poured the water into the ground near her mother's window, where the earth was dry and cracked. The moment the last drop touched the soil, a soft breeze rose from nowhere. Clouds gathered above, dark and full. A distant rumble echoed through the hills. Then, rain. Gentle, steady rain. It fell all night, washing the dust from rooftops, filling the wells and soaking the earth. The next morning, the air smelled of life again. The villagers danced in the streets, lifting their faces to the sky, laughing and crying all at once. Elara's mother awoke, her strength returning. Flowers bloomed again along the forest edge, and the river sang as it filled its banks. Time passed softly after that. Elara grew older, her hair long and dark like river water. She became known throughout the valley as the girl who brought peace wherever she went. Not because of magic, though some still whispered of it, but because her kindness had become a light others followed. When people quarreled, she was the one who helped them forgive. When someone was lonely, she was the one who listened. When something was broken, a heart, a toy, a hope, she found a way to mend it. And though she sometimes returned to the forest glade, the fairy did not appear again. Only once, many years later, when the air was full of spring rain and new blossoms, did she see it. A faint shimmer above the pool, a dance of light that made her heart flutter like a child's again. She understood then what the fairy's gift had truly been. It was not magic that could summon rain or heal with touch. It was the magic that lives in kindness, the quiet power to bring warmth where there is cold, peace where there is pain, light where there is sorrow. That gift had not been given to her alone. It had been awakened, something that had always been inside her heart. The fairy had only helped her see it. As the years went by, Ilara became the heart of her village. Children grew up hearing stories of the gentle girl who once brought rain to the valley. They left flowers by her garden gate, hoping some of her light might bless their days. And when Ilara herself grew old, her hair silver like moonlight, she often sat by her window and watched the forest. The trees still swayed, the river still whispered, and sometimes, when the wind was just right, she heard the faint hum of wings. When she finally drifted into sleep one soft spring night, the villagers said the air glowed faintly for days afterward. Dewdrops shimmered brighter, flowers opened earlier, and the forest seemed to sing. They knew then that the fairy's gift, Ilara's kindness, had not ended. It had simply changed form, spreading like light through all the hearts she had touched. And even now, if you walk deep into a quiet forest and listen carefully, you might hear the whisper of her story, the sound of a gentle breeze, a ripple of water, or the brush of wings. They say the forest remembers her, the girl whose kindness became magic. And somewhere in every kind heart that gives without asking, the fairy's gift lives on, glowing softly, quietly, forever. The end. In a faraway kingdom where the air was pure and the fields rippled like gold beneath the summer sun, there lived a young princess of remarkable grace and gentleness. From her earliest days, she had been raised among courtiers and scholars, her heart tenderly molded by lessons of virtue and kindness. Her mother, the queen, loved her dearly, for she saw in the girl not only the light of her youth, but also the hope of the realm's future. When the princess had grown to maidenhood, fair and pure as the first blossom of spring, the queen arranged for her to be married to a distant prince in a neighboring land. The union was to bind two noble houses in friendship and ensure peace across the borders. Preparations filled the palace. Chests were packed with silks, jewels, and treasures fit for a royal bride. Yet, amidst the bustle of servants and ceremony, the queen's heart grew heavy, for she knew that once her daughter departed, she might never look upon her beloved child again. So, before the day of parting arrived, the queen summoned her daughter to her chamber, not to offer jewels or gold, but to give something far more precious. From her private treasury, she took a small handkerchief embroidered with 3 drops of her own blood. She folded it tenderly and placed it in the maiden's hand, telling her that as long as she kept it close, her mother's love and protection would never fade. Then she blessed her child and watched her mount the snow-white horse that was to bear her on the long road to her new home. The princess set out with a single maidservant, chosen to attend her, and a horse named Falada, known throughout the kingdom for his strength and intelligence. The path wound through valleys and forests, beside rivers and fields, far beyond the sight of her mother's towers. For many days they travelled beneath the open sky, and the princess, though weary, bore herself with quiet dignity, her thoughts filled with dreams of her future husband and her mother's last embrace. But the maid who rode beside her was not faithful of heart. She was proud, cunning, and filled with envy at the sight of her mistress's beauty and gentle spirit. As the journey grew long and the days wore on, the princess, unaccustomed to hardship, grew thirsty and faint beneath the blazing sun. She turned to her maid for aid, asking her to fetch water from a stream they passed. But the maid, hardened by jealousy, refused. So the princess dismounted and knelt by the water herself. As she bent to drink, the little handkerchief slipped from her bosom and was swept away by the current. She did not notice at first, but the moment it vanished, a strange stillness fell upon the air, and she felt her strength and courage ebb, as if something invisible had been taken from her. The maid's eyes glittered, for she knew the charm was gone. In that moment, wickedness took root. She declared that she would no longer serve her mistress as a maid, but that the princess must serve her instead. The true princess, gentle and unworldly, trembled at the maid's fierce eyes and cruel tone. Fear overcame her pride. She yielded her fine garments, her jewels, and even her horse, and clothed herself in the rough dress of a servant. The false maid then mounted Falada and took the lead of the journey, while the rightful princess followed on foot, weeping softly but uttering no word of complaint. Thus they came at last to the prince's city. There the maid, pretending to be the royal bride, was welcomed with great honor. The princess, weary and humble in her rags, stood aside among the servants, unseen and unrecognized. None suspected her noble birth, for she bore her sorrow in silence. The false bride took up her place in the palace, while the true one was sent to tend the geese in the fields beyond the castle walls. Falada, the faithful horse, who knew his mistress's heart, would have revealed the truth had he been able. But the false bride feared his loyalty. She went to the prince and begged that the horse be slain, saying he had grown wild and dangerous. The prince, knowing no reason to refuse his bride's request, gave the order, and the noble creature was put to death. When the princess heard this, her heart nearly broke. Yet she went to the knacker, who was to remove the horse's remains, and begged that he hang the head of Falada beneath the great dark arch through which she passed daily with her flock of geese. The man, moved by her sorrowful beauty, did as she asked. Thereafter, every morning when the princess went forth, she would pass beneath the arch and whisper a greeting to her old friend, and the head, by some strange enchantment, would stir and answer her with words only she could hear, bidding her courage and patience. So passed the days. Each morning she drove the geese out to graze in the fields beyond the city, beside a quiet stream that wound through meadows of tall grass and wild flowers. The other gooseherd was a boy named Conrad, merry and bold, who could not understand why the strange, silent maiden, with her delicate hands and sorrowful eyes, should choose to herd geese. But she gave him no answer, and though he often sought to tease or play, she remained as gentle and distant as the moon above their fields. The wind loved to toy with her golden hair, bright as sunlight upon water, and whenever she loosed it to comb, it flowed around her like a river of light. Conrad would marvel at it, for he had never seen such beauty, and often tried to snatch a strand for himself. But each time he drew near, she would lift her hands and whisper something to the breeze, and instantly the wind would rise, whirling about him and driving his cap far across the meadow until he had to chase it down, while she stood laughing softly to herself, her sadness momentarily eased. Though the life of a goose girl was humble, she bore her burden with quiet grace. The villagers grew fond of her gentle ways, calling her the silent maiden of the meadows. Yet within her heart, the memory of her mother's kingdom, of her loyal horse, and of her lost station lay heavy as winter frost. She never spoke of her sorrow, nor revealed her true name, for she knew the maid who had betrayed her was powerful now, and that the prince himself believed the impostor to be his destined bride. Still, there were moments when the truth glimmered faintly through her silence. For in the evenings, when the geese were penned and the sky burned crimson with sunset, she would wander alone beside the stream, watching her reflection in the water and whispering to it as if to a friend. Those who saw her from afar would shake their heads and say she was under a spell, for she seemed half lost between the world of mortals and that of dreams. Meanwhile, within the palace, the false bride lived in fear. Though she wore the crown and dined at the prince's side, her heart was never at ease. She feared discovery at every turn. Sometimes, when the wind howled in the courtyards, she imagined it carried the sound of Falada's voice, or the whisper of the true princess's name. She began to avoid mirrors and dark corridors, for she felt unseen eyes upon her, and guilt weighed on her like a shadow that would not lift. Yet the prince, though courteous and kind, felt a strange disquiet whenever he looked upon his betrothed. She was fair enough, but there was something in her manner, a hardness, a pride, that chilled his heart. He could not say why, but he often found his thoughts straying to the quiet goose girl who tended the flocks beyond the city. Her face haunted him in ways he could not explain, for her eyes, though filled with sorrow, held a light of truth that stirred his spirit. One morning, he passed through the gate beneath which Falada's head hung, and thought he heard a faint murmur, like a whisper carried on the wind. But when he looked up, there was nothing but the sun, glinting on bone and stone. Troubled, he continued on his way. Yet from that day, he began to watch the meadows more closely. He would ride out to hunt or walk by the fields, and there he would see the goose girl, moving among her flock, her motions calm and graceful, her hair shining in the light. Often, when the wind rose suddenly, he saw the boy Conrad's hat flying through the air and heard her laugh, a sound pure and bright as the bells of spring. Something within him stirred, and though he did not understand it, he began to sense that destiny had hidden its truest treasure in humble guise. Thus, time passed quietly, the false bride growing ever more restless in the palace, and the true princess tending her geese beneath the endless sky. The kingdom itself seemed to wait, as though some invisible thread held all hearts in suspense until truth should speak again. And though no one yet knew it, the moment of revelation drew near. Autumn descended upon the kingdom, and the golden fields that had once rippled in summer sunlight now swayed under a softer, cooler wind. The air carried the scent of fallen leaves and distant smoke, and the days shortened into quiet, thoughtful evenings. Each morning, the humble goose girl continued her gentle routine. She passed beneath the stone arch where the head of Falada hung, bowed her head in sorrow, and went on toward the open fields with her flock. Though no one else could hear, it seemed that the spirit of her loyal companion still watched over her, offering silent comfort in her solitude. Her daily path did not go unnoticed. The chamberlain, an observant man who often crossed that same archway, began to wonder about the strange maiden who paused before the horse's skull as if in reverence. Sometimes he thought he saw her lips move, and once he fancied he heard a faint murmur echo back to her. Troubled by what he did not understand, he brought word of this to the old king. The king, wise and thoughtful, did not dismiss the tale. He had long been aware of rumors, whispers of a girl among the gooseherds who bore herself like one of noble birth. When he heard the chamberlain's account, he resolved to see with his own eyes. At dawn the next day, he hid himself near the archway, veiled by the shadows of the gate. Soon the maiden appeared, walking with quiet grace. her geese moving in gentle procession behind her. She paused beneath the arch and lingered for a moment, her expression filled with sorrow and longing. The king, watching closely, felt a strange stirring in his heart. There was an air of purity about her, a nobility that no rags could hide. When she moved on toward the fields, he followed from a distance, unseen. Beyond the city walls, the goose girl tended her flock beside the river meadows, where the grass swayed in soft waves and the sunlight glimmered on the water. She loosed her long, golden hair, and it shimmered in the light like a veil of pure gold. The young gooseherd boy who worked beside her laughed and tried to play. Yet each time he reached toward her, a sudden wind would rise, teasing him away, leaving her untouched and calm once more. The king watched from afar, and what he saw filled him with both wonder and pity. That evening, when she returned to the city, the king quietly followed her to the humble dwelling where she lived. The woman who kept the cottage told him that the maiden spoke little of her past, that she was gentle, industrious, and melancholy, and that she often sat by the window after nightfall, gazing toward the distant hills, as though remembering another life. The king thanked the woman and departed, his heart heavy with thought. In the stillness of that night, he pondered what he had seen. There was truth hidden in the silence of the goose girl, and sorrow buried beneath her humility. He decided that the mystery must be unraveled, not through force or command, but through patience and wisdom. The following day, the maiden was summoned to the palace under pretense of helping with household tasks. She came quietly, her eyes lowered, her hands folded before her. The king, kind and watchful, observed her from afar. Her movements were graceful and her bearing noble, yet she seemed bound by some invisible grief. No question could draw more than a faint nod or a whispered reply. And the king saw that fear or honor kept her silent. When all gentle inquiry failed, he devised a different way to uncover the truth. He caused a great stove of iron to be heated in the courtyard and ordered that she be left there alone, free to speak her heart to it, as though confiding in something that could neither betray nor judge her. Left to herself in the glow of the firelight, the maiden at last yielded to her sorrow. Her voice, though low, carried the weight of all she had endured. She told of her long journey from her mother's kingdom, of her faithful horse and her cruel maid, of treachery, of loss, and of the long, bitter days of servitude spent among the geese. Her confession was spoken not to seek pity, but because her soul could no longer bear the silence. Unbeknown to her, the king had remained near, hidden from sight, listening. Every word struck his heart with equal measure of grief and awe. When her tale was ended, he no longer doubted who she truly was. The deception that had been wrought against her was laid bare in all its cruelty. He brought forth the true princess from her place of hiding and clothed her in garments of gold and white. When she was arrayed as befit her birth, her beauty shone with such radiance that even those who had known her before might have thought her touched by divine light. The king looked upon her with deep affection and sorrow, for she had endured much and spoken little. Yet through her suffering, she had shown the strength of true nobility. That evening, the court gathered for a great feast. The prince sat beside the woman who had come to him in the guise of a bride, unaware that her deceit was soon to be revealed. The hall glittered with candles, and the sound of music filled the air. Yet beneath the surface, an unseen tension lingered, like a shadow waiting to fall. At the height of the feast, the king rose. His gaze moved slowly across the hall, resting at last upon the false bride. Without naming her, he told the assembled guests a story. The very story the true princess had confessed. It was told as a fable, yet every detail mirrored the reality of the impostor's crime. The guests listened in uneasy silence, and when the tale was finished, the king asked what punishment such wickedness deserved. The false bride, not realizing that her own deeds had been unveiled, gave her answer: cold, proud, and cruel. It was an answer born of the same heart that had betrayed innocence. The king, grave and unyielding, gave the signal, and her fate was sealed by the very words she had spoken. The hall fell silent once more. The deceit that had clouded the kingdom was lifted, and justice, though slow, had come at last. The true princess was brought forth and placed beside the prince, who saw now what his heart had sensed before, that she was the one destined for him. In her quiet strength and her steadfast patience, he saw a beauty far deeper than the splendor of jewels or crowns. Their wedding was renewed with great celebration. Bells rang across the land, and the people rejoiced, for the rightful queen had been restored. The old king, content in his wisdom, blessed their union, and letters were sent across mountains and seas to the queen mother, bearing the joyful news that her daughter was safe and honored once more. Peace returned to the realm. The memory of deceit faded like a passing storm, leaving behind clear skies and calm hearts. The faithful horse Falada was given rest in the royal gardens, his head laid to rest among white roses, and his story was whispered through generations as a symbol of loyalty beyond death. The young gooseherd boy was rewarded for his service and lived contently among the royal stables, proud to have known the gentle maiden who once walked beside him in the fields. In the years that followed, the princess reigned beside her husband with grace and wisdom. She never forgot the lessons of her long trial. That kindness is strength, that patience is nobler than pride, and that truth, though hidden by falsehood, will one day rise again. Her compassion became a light to all who dwelt in her kingdom, and under her rule, peace endured. Sometimes, on quiet evenings, she would walk through the palace gardens alone, where the roses glowed pale beneath the moonlight. The wind moved softly through the trees, and in that gentle murmur, she would imagine the distant echo of Falada's spirit, a whisper of faith and friendship that would never fade. In those moments, she would remember all that had passed, not with bitterness, but with gratitude, for even sorrow had led her to wisdom. Thus ended the tale of the Goose Girl, a story of innocence tested by treachery, of truth revealed through patience, and of justice that comes in its own time. The winds that once carried her tears now carried blessings across the land, and in the stillness of every dawn, the kingdom awoke in quiet peace, watched over by a queen who had once tended geese beneath the open sky. In a quiet little village surrounded by green meadows and gentle hills, there once lived a young tailor. His home was small, tucked neatly at the corner of a cobblestone street, where the air always smelled faintly of fabric, thread, and freshly baked bread. Though his shop was modest and his tools simple, his hands were skilled and his eyes were sharp. From sunrise to sunset, he worked by the window, sewing coats and mending dresses for the townsfolk who came and went through the village square. He had little money, but he was content. Each morning, he greeted the sunlight that spilled across his wooden table and began his day with quiet determination. The tailor's world was calm, filled with the steady rhythm of needle and thread, and the gentle hum of his thoughts. One bright morning, while the tailor worked on a fine piece of cloth, The sweet aroma of fruit jam drifted through the window. A woman was selling jars of plum jam in the street below. The tailor, who hadn't eaten much since dawn, decided to treat himself. He bought a small jar and placed it carefully on his table. He smiled, ready to enjoy it later after finishing his stitching. As he bent over his work, a buzzing sound filled the air. 7 flies, greedy and bold, had found the jam and were dancing over it, dipping their legs and wings into the sweetness. The tailor frowned. He tried to wave them away, but the flies only grew bolder. Then, with a sudden burst of energy, he picked up a piece of cloth and brought it down swiftly. When he lifted it, he saw 7 flies lying still. The tailor blinked in surprise, then in delight. A thrill ran through him. Never before had he done something that felt so impressive. He looked at the motionless flies and whispered to himself, 7 at one blow. An idea began to form in his clever mind. He cut a strip of fabric and embroidered those very words on it, 7 at one blow. He stitched the letters in bold thread and fastened the belt around his waist with pride. The tailor felt a spark of courage he had never known before. If he could strike down 7 flies in a single swing, who could say what else he might do? He decided that the world was too wide and wonderful for him to remain in his little shop. Packing a small bag with cheese, bread, and his sewing needle, he stepped out of his home to seek adventure. The road stretched before him like a ribbon of promise. The fields shimmered with morning dew, and the tailor walked with light steps, whistling softly. He felt taller, stronger and braver with each mile he traveled. After a long walk, he climbed a hill and sat beneath a tall oak tree to rest. From his bag, he took a piece of bread and cheese and began to eat. Not far away, he noticed a giant sitting on a rock, staring at the clouds drifting lazily through the sky. The tailor's heart raced. A real giant. The creature was enormous, his arms thick as tree trunks, his beard tangled like vines. Though fear flickered in the tailor's chest, his courage quickly returned. He remembered the words embroidered on his belt. 7 at one blow. Surely a man who could defeat 7 in one strike had nothing to fear from anyone, not even a giant. He approached confidently and stood beside the towering figure. The giant turned and glared down at him. The tailor puffed out his chest and pointed to the words on his belt. The giant's eyes narrowed as he read them. He did not know what the words meant, but they sounded impressive. He thought this tiny man must be some great warrior. Wanting to test his strength, the giant picked up a heavy stone and crushed it to powder in his hand. The tailor smiled calmly and reached into his bag. He took out a piece of soft cheese that looked exactly like a stone. Pressing it tightly between his fingers, he squeezed until a stream of milk trickled out. The giant's eyes widened in surprise. Next, the giant tore a tree from the ground and challenged the tailor to throw it farther than he could. The tailor nodded, picked up the tree, and cleverly let it roll down the hill. The giant, thinking the tailor had thrown it with great force, grunted in astonishment. Though the giant admired the tailor's skill, he also grew uneasy. Such strength in such a small man was strange and dangerous. When night came, the giant invited the tailor to stay in his cave, but he planned to get rid of him while he slept. The cave was dark and cold. The giant lay down on one side and soon pretended to snore. The tailor, sensing trouble, stayed awake. When the giant thought the tailor had fallen asleep, he lifted a heavy club and brought it down hard on the bed. But the clever tailor had quietly slipped into a corner, safe and sound. At dawn, When the giant saw the tailor stretching and smiling, as if nothing had happened, he turned pale with fear. Believing that no one could survive such a blow, he fled the cave in terror, leaving the tailor alone with the sunrise. The tailor laughed softly to himself. His cleverness had once again kept him safe. With renewed confidence, he continued on his journey until he reached the gates of a grand castle. The guards stopped him, but when they saw the belt around his waist, their eyes grew wide. They hurried to the king, who immediately sent for the stranger, said to have defeated 7 at one blow. The tailor was brought before the king. The ruler, a proud but worried man, explained that his kingdom was plagued by 2 giants who lived in the mountains. They terrified travelers and destroyed villages. The king promised a great reward to anyone who could rid the land of them. The tailor bowed and accepted the challenge. Though he knew he was small and unarmed, his wits were sharp. He climbed the mountain at dawn and found the 2 giants sleeping beneath the shade of a massive tree. Their snores echoed through the forest like thunder. The tailor gathered stones and climbed up the tree above them. He dropped 1 stone gently onto the chest of one giant, who stirred but did not wake. Then he dropped another onto the second giant. The first giant opened his eyes and turned angrily toward his companion, believing he had been struck. The other roared in confusion. Within moments, they began to fight. The ground shook beneath their mighty blows. Trees splintered, rocks cracked, and dust filled the air. When it was over, both giants lay motionless. The tailor climbed down quietly and smiled. The problem had solved itself. He returned to the castle and told the king the giants would trouble the land no more. The king, astonished, promised him gold and glory. Yet there was still another danger in the realm, a wild unicorn that roamed the forest, piercing everything in its path with its shining horn. Once again, the tailor volunteered. When he found the unicorn, it charged at him, its hooves pounding the earth. The tailor dodged swiftly behind a tree. The unicorn struck the trunk with such force that its horn became stuck. While the creature struggled, the tailor took his belt and tied it tightly around the unicorn's neck. He led it back to the castle like a farmer leading a horse. The king was both impressed and uneasy. He had promised the tailor his daughter's hand in marriage, but he feared this brave little man might one day take his throne. So the king devised one final task: to capture a dangerous boar that ravaged the royal forest. The tailor accepted once more. He entered the forest with nothing but a piece of rope and his quick mind. He soon spotted the boar rooting among the trees. The beast saw him and charged. The tailor ran straight toward a small chapel nearby and slipped inside. The boar followed, but the tailor ran out through the back door and slammed the front door shut, trapping the creature inside. When the king's men came to look, they found the boar caught and the tailor standing proudly beside the door. The kingdom erupted in celebration. True to his word, the king gave the tailor his daughter's hand in marriage, and a grand feast was held. Though many whispered that a tailor was too humble to marry a princess, the people could not deny his cleverness and courage. In the days that followed, the tailor became known not just for his strength or luck, but for his wisdom. He ruled beside the princess with kindness and fairness, treating all people, rich or poor, with equal respect. But sometimes, in the quiet of the night, when the castle was asleep and moonlight poured through the windows, the tailor would look down at his old belt, still embroidered with those proud words, 7 at one blow. He would smile softly, remembering that his greatest strength had never been in his arms, but in his mind. And so, the tailor lived a long and happy life, proving to the world that true bravery is not about size or power, but about cleverness, courage, and heart. Once upon a time, in a kingdom surrounded by misty mountains and enchanted forests, there lived a king and queen who had everything a ruler could wish for: wealth, power, and loyal subjects. But one thing they longed for most was a true princess. They had searched far and wide for a young woman whose heart and spirit shone with gentle nobility. Yet every visitor seemed ordinary, and none matched the delicate grace they sought. One stormy night, a violent tempest swept across the kingdom. Thunder rolled over the mountains and lightning split the sky. Rain lashed the palace walls, and the river that ran through the valley swelled with fury. At the gates of the castle, a solitary figure appeared, drenched and exhausted. She stumbled through the puddles, her hair plastered to her face, and her gown clinging heavily to her body. Yet even in her disheveled state, there was something unusual about her. A soft glow seemed to follow her, a quiet strength shining through the storm. The queen, who possessed a keen eye for truth and character, immediately sensed that this young woman was unlike any other. She led her into the castle, where the roaring fire cast golden reflections upon the walls. The young woman shivered but did not complain, her eyes holding a mixture of wonder and determination. The king, curious yet cautious, observed silently. There was something ethereal about this visitor, as though she belonged not just in a castle, but in a world touched by magic. Determined to discover whether she was indeed a true princess, the queen devised a test unlike any other. She prepared a grand bed, stacked with 20 mattresses, each plump and luxurious. Beneath the lowest mattress, she placed a single green pea, round and unassuming, yet capable of revealing the most delicate sensitivity of a genuine princess. Legends said that only a true princess, with a heart attuned to the subtlest sensations, could feel its presence through such layers. The young woman was guided to the bed and allowed to rest. The storm raged outside, the wind howling through the castle towers, and the rain hammering the windows. But inside, the castle was warm and still. The princess lay down carefully, sinking into the layers of mattresses, and almost immediately felt an unusual discomfort. Something small and firm pressed against her back, tiny yet persistent. She shifted and turned, trying to find a comfortable position, yet the sensation remained, subtle but undeniable. Hours passed, the night deepened, and in her restless sleep, the princess dreamed of strange, beautiful things. She wandered through forests where trees whispered secrets, crossed sparkling rivers that glowed with moonlight, and climbed mountains that reached the stars. All the while, the persistent pressure beneath her reminded her of the world she had left behind, a world full of challenges, waiting for the strength of her heart outside the bedroom. The king and queen watched in anticipation. The queen's eyes sparkled as she noted the princess's tossing and turning, her subtle reactions, and the quiet endurance in her delicate frame. The king, impressed by her resilience, realized that this sensitivity and grace could not be feigned. Here was someone extraordinary, capable of perceiving even the tiniest discomforts with gentleness and awareness. As dawn approached, the storm outside began to subside. Sunlight broke through the clouds, casting golden beams across the castle walls. The princess stirred, finally sitting up, her hair damp but her spirit unwavering. When asked about her night, she admitted that she had felt something hard beneath the mattresses, which had made her sleep uneasy. At that moment, the queen's heart leapt with joy. The princess's sensitivity was proof. She was genuine, a true princess in every sense. Yet, the story did not end with the simple revelation of her status. Over the following days, the princess encountered further challenges that tested not only her sensitivity, but also her courage and compassion. In the palace gardens, she discovered a wounded bird whose wing had been broken by the storm. She gently tended to the bird, speaking softly to calm its fear, and stayed by its side until it could fly again. She wandered into the castle kitchens, where the servants struggled to prepare a feast for visiting dignitaries. Without complaint, she offered to help, learning quickly how to knead dough and arrange fruits. Though tasks like these seemed trivial, her attention to every detail, every subtle imperfection, earned the admiration of all who witnessed her humility and care. One evening, a mysterious fog descended upon the castle. Strange sounds echoed through the halls, and the paintings on the walls seemed to shimmer unnaturally. The princess, undeterred, explored the corridors with caution. In a forgotten chamber, she found an ancient tapestry depicting a long-lost ancestor, a queen renowned for her wisdom and kindness. The tapestry whispered secrets of the kingdom's past, revealing hidden passages and forgotten treasures. With careful steps, the princess discovered a secret garden beyond the castle walls, where magical flowers bloomed only under moonlight. Here, she learned that true royalty wasn't measured by wealth or status, but by empathy, awareness, and the courage to act in the service of others. Word of her deeds spread through the kingdom. Villagers brought small gifts of gratitude. Artisans offered handmade crafts, and even animals seemed to follow her wherever she went. Her sensitivity, first revealed by a tiny green pea, became her greatest strength. It allowed her to notice the suffering and joys of others, to respond with kindness, and to make subtle choices that changed lives for the better. Eventually, the king and queen declared her a member of the royal family, celebrating her arrival with a magnificent festival. The castle was adorned with thousands of flowers, banners of shimmering silk, and lanterns that glowed like captured stars. Musicians played gentle melodies, and the air was filled with the scent of roses, lilacs, and fresh baked bread. Yet amid the grandeur, the princess remained humble, her heart attuned to the needs of others, her gaze soft and observant. In the years that followed, the princess's presence transformed the kingdom. She wandered the gardens at dawn, noting the tiniest details, the dew on a petal, the rhythm of a bird's song, the pattern of sunlight through the leaves. She visited villages, listened to stories of hardship, and quietly worked to improve the lives of her people. Every small act of care, every gesture of kindness, spread through the kingdom like ripples across a calm lake. The princess's fame grew, not because of her beauty or her title, but because of her extraordinary perception and compassionate heart. She inspired the courtiers, the villagers, and the children who had once gazed in awe at the castle from afar. Her sensitivity, which had been revealed by a tiny pea beneath 20 mattresses, was celebrated as a symbol of true nobility, a reminder that greatness comes not from power or wealth, but from awareness, empathy, and quiet courage. And so, the princess lived happily in the castle, tending gardens, exploring hidden chambers, discovering magical corners, and learning from the people she served. She became a ruler in her own right, guiding the kingdom with wisdom and heart. The story of the princess and the pea endured through the ages, not only as a tale of sensitivity and grace, but as a story of bravery, discovery, and the power of a gentle, perceptive heart. The kingdom thrived under her care, its rivers sparkling, gardens blooming, and people smiling in harmony. The tiny green pea, though long forgotten beneath layers of mattresses, remained a symbol of the extraordinary within the ordinary, a reminder that even the smallest detail can reveal the greatest truths. And the princess, gentle and wise, continued to walk through her kingdom, noticing the subtle beauties of the world, touching lives with kindness and showing all who met her that a heart attuned to others is the truest form of royalty.